Hello YouTube, I'm back with another vlogish opinion video on Three Houses. Now, since making the first impressions video a couple weeks ago, I've played a lot more Three Houses. I've beaten Blue Lions on Hard Classic, and I am working on Golden Deers on Hard Classic. So since I've beaten one of the routes now, and I have a better understanding of the game mechanics, I would like to restate my opinion on Three Houses. Because in the first impressions video, there was a lot that I glossed over, and I don't think I had as much of an understanding of the game mechanics as I do now. So now that I do have a better understanding, I am just going to start fresh so that nobody has to watch the first impressions video. Just gonna go straight from the beginning, and you can take or leave my opinion, like you can with any opinion. So, for anybody who missed that video, my opinion of Three Houses is that it's overall a very positive experience. It's a great game, and it's definitely the best modern Fire Emblem game. Modern meaning anything from Awakening onwards. The 3DS games, I don't think I can look back on those very fondly, unfortunately. But one issue that I have with Three Houses is that it continues this sort of trend from Awakening onwards of kind of removing more of the mechanics that define the GBA games and kind of replacing it with some of the mechanics that I really don't like from the pre-GBA Fire Emblem games. Because you gotta remember, I grew up with Sacred Stones and Path of Radiance. Those are my favorites in the whole series. So, that's probably my bias. I played those first and got to know them the best. Therefore, I like them the best. But I still think that there are a lot of mechanics there that are slowly being phased out of Fire Emblem. And part of this might have to do with the fact that Three Houses was developed mainly by Koei Tecmo. I mean, I'm sure Intelligent Systems had their influence on the game, but there's a lot of Koei Tecmo in the credits. And Koei Tecmo, I like their strategy games. I've played some of their very classic strategy games, and I like those too, but they're nothing like Fire Emblem. See, this is the thing. The GBA games and the mechanics therein, those really defined Fire Emblem for me. So seeing them get phased out and a bunch of mechanics from like Gaiden and stuff, because there are a lot of Gaiden mechanics in the modern Fire Emblem games. I mean, like, you have Echoes, which is a remake of Gaiden. But anyways, I suppose I should just get to talking about Three Houses. And I'm going to start from scratch so that nobody has to watch the first impressions video, because that thing is 40 minutes long and I don't want you to have to sit through that. And the first impressions video is also very disorganized. Hopefully this video will be much more organized. So, starting from the beginning, the premise of Three Houses is that you are this professor at a combat academy, right? So, the idea is that you teach your students how to use weapons, how to ride horses and stuff, and that increases all of their weapon ranks. That's how the weapon ranks work in this game. And I don't really hate the concept, because if you think about it, every character in the game is basically an Echoes villager. You can customize them however you want, you can teach them whatever you want, you can make them into any class you want. However, I have an issue with the class system itself, actually, because the weapon ranks that you give to your students, that determines what classes they can change into. But any class can use any physical weapon anyways. Yeah, this was a big thing for me, because what I realized is that any class in the game can just use bows or punching, which is a new weapon type. I'll get to that in a little bit. And a big part of classes in Fire Emblem is that the class determines what weapon you're allowed to use. Now, the weapon that you're using determines what class you're going to be. So, like, if you train in swords, you can be a mercenary. If you train in magic, you can be a mage. And the classes have different requirements for what weapon ranks you need in order to be able to change into them, sure. But the thing is, you can still use any weapon type as any class. So, even though you need to train your lances and your riding to become a cavalier, you're still able to use bows. And bows have basically become the best weapon type in the entire game, and I have no idea how that happened. Well, actually, I do know how that happened, because I'm about to tell you. See, Your characters learn combat arts, spells, and skills, which are now called abilities, from the weapon ranks that they raise. The reason bows have become basically the best weapon in the game is due to a number of factors. One is that anytime a character reaches rank C with bows, they get an ability that allows them to counterattack with bows at one range, which means that the one weakness of archery has now disappeared. They used to not be able to counterattack at one range without a special kind of weapon. Now they can, and as I said, any class can use any weapon type in the game, so you're always gonna want to go with bows, at least in my opinion, because of this ability that is universal to all of the classes and characters. Now, I mentioned punching earlier. That's a new weapon type that they have actually introduced. Punching is something that has never really happened in Fire Emblem. I guess you can make a case for the Laguz and Radiant Dawn being able to punch things while they were untransformed, but gauntlets are now a weapon type, and all gauntlets in the game have the Brave effect, which means that if you initiate combat with them, you get double the number of attacks. If you double an enemy normally, initiating combat with a gauntlet allows you to hit them 4 times, and that's really, like, I have no idea what they were thinking there. That's gotta be, like, the most easily abused weapon type in the game. Like, we already love the Brave weapons because of being able to hit 4 times on player phase. So, like, making that the common trait of an entire weapon type is, like, I don't know what they were thinking. And it gets even worse because anybody who reaches B rank with gauntlets, they get a combat art that allows you to heal yourself for free. I'm not kidding. You have to use up your turn for this, so it's like a vulnerary, but you get like a percentage of your health back, so you don't really need vulneraries or concoctions anymore. I don't really know what the idea was here. So they've made 2 busted weapon types that any class in the game can use. And I know that the mounted classes are unable to punch because, you know, you can't punch while you're on a horse. That'd be just silly. But they can get off the horse now because the dismount mechanic came back from Mystery of the Emblem. So yeah, your mounted classes are able to just dismount and be able to punch that way. So the best class, the best physical class anyways, are the Cavaliers and the Flyers because they can still use bows because they're not locked out of using bows, and they can still punch because they can get off their horses and punch that way. Magic classes, on the other hand, magic is very, very weird. So for magic, 3 Houses has black magic and white magic, just like Echoes. And any mage class in the game can use all types of magic. There might be a preference towards one type of magic over another, but if your class can use magic, then you're allowed to use any magic the character has learned. And characters learn, they all have individual learn sets as far as magic goes, so as you raise their magic ranks, they will learn different spells depending on who they are, and that's yet another Gaiden mechanic. That's how it worked in Gaiden, so they've done it again here, and, you know, this is going to be a running theme throughout the video, actually. They have this weird fixation with Echoes mechanics, and I have no real idea why that is. Combat arts came back, and they cost durability instead of costing HP, which I think was a very good decision, and I actually like the combat arts enough to use them very often now. However, magic now works on a Dungeons & Dragons style spells per battle system. So, like, in every battle, if you've learned the heal spell, you'll have 10 heals. If you've learned the Nosferatu spell, you'll have 5 Nosferatus. And also, every character in the game gets heal and Nosferatu, just like Echoes, again. And I never really understood that because it means you're going to be able to warp as many times as you want throughout the entire campaign. If a character learns warp, you get like 1 warp per battle, unless they're the Bishop class, in which case they'll have 2 warps, because the Bishop and Warlock classes double the number of spell uses you get for that particular kind of magic. So, you're going to be able to warp 2 times or more if you brought more characters with warp per battle. And the entire idea behind weapon durability, I think, is that you're supposed to gauge how many warps you can afford to use in the current battle versus however many warps you think you're going to need throughout the entire campaign. So the durability management is now much more confined to individual battles instead of like spread throughout the entire campaign. And this kind of goes for physical weapons too, because you're now allowed to repair any weapon without a special staff to do it. You just need to pay a fee and some materials. You can collect materials throughout the game and they can be used to forge new weapons or repair old ones. And that basically means that, when you broke the Brave Sword in a GBA Fire Emblem, that was it. No more Brave Sword for the rest of the game. But now, since items don't disappear when they break anymore, you can eventually just like repair it and use that same Brave Sword over and over again, whereas in the previous games you would have to be more careful about when and where you use it. And I know that players tend to, like, whenever they get a powerful weapon, they just toss it in the convoy and never use it because it's too awesome to use. I might need it later, so why should I use it now? And I honestly consider that a problem with player mentality rather than the game design itself, because there are games in this series that make it very clear that you really should use the powerful items and weapons you get, otherwise you're going to struggle quite a lot. And I personally also don't really struggle with using my heals effectively throughout each map, because I have plenty of mages in my party, so they've each got heal and Nosferatu and Physic, Fortify, whatever they learn, they've got plenty to work with, because each mage in my party is also a possible healer as well. And since I'm on the subject, I might as well ask this question as well. Is there really any difference between a mage and a priest if they can both use the same kinds of magic? I mean, I know that bishops have a preference towards white magic, but that doesn't stop them from using black magic and being good at that too. In fact, when I was playing Blue Lions, Mercedes was a much better offensive mage than Annette was, simply because Mercedes has the stats to actually use black magic, and Annette really doesn't. And I think this is a good time to talk about what actually defines each class in the game, because I've mentioned that all classes are capable of using any physical weapon, and all of the mage classes can use any kind of magic, so really, in my opinion, there are only a few key defining aspects of each class, those being how many spaces it moves, whether or not it has a mount, what mount that is, and whether or not they can use magic. So that's not a lot of things defining each class, and I know there are class skills, and I know each class modifies your growth rates, and I also know that if you stick to the same class for long enough, there are bonus abilities you can get out of that as well. Like the first class you start the game with, if you stick to it long enough, you'll eventually get HP plus 5 as a skill. I get that, but it doesn't really feel like enough, because the most optimal class in the game for all of the physical units is going to be either a Wyvern or a Cavalier. Just because they're mounted, they can move really far. If they need to punch something, they can dismount. And for magic units, you basically just want bishops and warlocks. So even with all of these classes and all of this customization possibilities, like, there's a lot of freedom, but kind of not. Because if a unit is magic based, like they have a lot of high magic, or they have a personal skill like Mercedes that favors white magic very much, you're not going to want to make them into a physical unit. You might want to give them physical weapons skills, because, like, a mage using a combat art with a magic weapon can actually be pretty deadly, so that's pretty cool too. But a physical unit is never ever going to want to be a mage, because their magic is going to be so low. They can't do anything with their magic damage, and even if they're emergency healers with a powerful utility spell like Silence or something, that's still a lot of investment for something so small that another unit could probably handle even better anyways. Like, there are these things called budding talents, which basically just means you teach a unit to use a certain kind of weapon type and they'll eventually unlock a new skill. Felix has a budding talent for black magic, and he is a physical unit through and through. You don't want to make him a mage because his magic is going to suck. I know there's a class called Mortal Savant, which favors swords pretty heavily and has magic available, but you know, he can use any physical weapon you want. He doesn't have to use swords, and he doesn't have to go to Mortal Savant. And I realize that Mortal Savant has a proficiency for swords. Like, if you use swords as a Mortal Savant, they have a class skill that gives you +5 damage when you're using a sword. But if bows do the job just as well, then I don't really mind missing out on the +5 damage. So yeah, that ended up more disorganized than I was hoping for, but at the end of the day, my main points are bows and punching are overpowered. It's silly to have individual learn sets for combat arts and magic spells. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And because every class can use every physical weapon anyways, the only real difference between the classes are whether or not they use magic, what mount they're using, and what their movement is. Now, there used to be a game mechanic in Fire Emblem that encouraged much more variety in the kinds of weapons you were using, called the Weapon Triangle, which made it so that swords got an advantage against axes, axes got an advantage against lances, and lances beat swords. And when it was announced that Three Houses was going to not include the Weapon Triangle this time, at least not in the traditional form, people were surprisingly positive about this because, you know, we were getting rid of the kitty rock, paper, scissors mechanic. We were getting rid of the thing that was making it so we couldn't use whatever kind of weapon we wanted to use when we wanted to use it. And, you know, that's not really, like, I don't really get that opinion, because first of all, the Weapon Triangle wasn't just about rock, paper, scissors with each individual enemy. There are multiple enemies on every map, each wielding potentially a different kind of weapon, so whenever you make your unit formations, you have to be thinking about who can get attacked by what enemy and what kind of weapon they're using. There's a lot more than just rock, paper, scissors. And besides, with the Weapon Triangle, you have the potential to reduce the amount of luck involved, because you can maybe turn an 80% chance to hit into a 100% chance to hit if you have the Weapon Triangle advantage, etc. And the Weapon Triangle also gives you a reason to use swords, lances, and axes on your entire team. Without the Weapon Triangle, swords are pretty much the best weapon type in the game, because they're also the lightest weapon type in the game. Before the creation of the Constitution stat, heavy weapons were just not that practical because they tanked your attack speed. And in Three Houses, we don't have a Constitution stat. We basically have a weight system that works just like the old Fire Emblem games, except you get 1 point of speed back for every 5 points of strength that the character has, which basically makes it like Path of Radiance, which means that mages using heavy spells are going to not be very happy. But anyways, that's a problem with the weight system. But what I'm saying is, with the Weapon Triangle, you can kind of mitigate the natural weaknesses of the three weapon types. Like, if you have axes going against lances, axes are normally the heaviest, most inaccurate weapons in the game, but they're also the most powerful. So with the Weapon Triangle advantage, you can kind of fix the accuracy issue just a little bit. And it is kind of worth mentioning that the Weapon Triangle does exist in Three Houses to an extent. Like, if you get a weapon rank all the way up to B, you get a skill that gives you a bonus against the weapon type that your weapon had advantage against. So if you get swords all the way up to B, then you get Axe Breaker, which means you get a hit and avoid bonus against axes. The only problem with this is, A, you have to wait until rank B to use it, B, the enemies can never use it, so it's not really a substitute, and C, the prowess skills that you get for raising your weapon ranks anyways is a much better alternative because they give you more hit, more avoid, more crit avoid, and they're usable against any enemy in the game besides, like, the ones using the weapon type you have the advantage over. So, the breaker skills, not a very good substitute for the Weapon Triangle. In fact, it feels like they were just thrown in to kind of reference the Weapon Triangle in a kind of cheeky manner. Another more minor issue I have with Three Houses is that there's no rescuing, which means no picking up and dropping units. That was a really nice way for flyers to ferry units across the map and cut down on the amount of time it takes for units to get to places, but that's not really here anymore. There's no pair-up from Awakening either, and adjutants aren't really the same thing, but they kind of are, so, you know, there's that. And another thing is, in Three Houses, the Steal command is back. If you master the Thief class, you can use it as any class, which leads to flying Pegasus Knight thieves, which is fun, but you can't really steal anything you want to. And, you know, this isn't as big of an issue because most of the games after Thracia 776, they were very restrictive on what you were allowed to steal, but I would really like to see some freedom in what you're allowed to steal. The good news is you're allowed to steal items even if they drop, which means you can steal Dark Seals from the Death Knight without having to kill him, and you can steal equipment, which means you can steal an Aurora shield off a flying unit so that they're vulnerable to arrows again. But you're not able to steal unequipped weapons, which is unfortunate because there are plenty of unequipped weapons on enemies that I would love to be able to steal. So, you know, I just think it would make the game more fun if you had more freedom in what you're allowed to steal, but it's not such a big deal. But there are cool new mechanics in Three Houses too. There are gambits, which are a really nice new mechanic. I really like them. I wish they were a little more controlled because some of them are crazy broken, like Stride, the Area of Effect Dance Maneuver, etc. But they're fun to use, they look awesome, and I really like the one gambit that allows you to pull enemy archers off their ballista and stun them. That was always fun, and that's a flying gambit too. There are restrictions on what gambits are allowed to be used by flying units because they're tied to battalions, and you know, you can't use a ground battalion with a flying unit. That would be just silly. So that gives a reason for having lots of cavalry in your team as well. So that's nice. I also thought that the monster enemies were cool to fight. They're big, they take up multiple spaces, they have extra lives, which is really weird, but I actually really like fighting them a lot. But another thing that I'm kind of on the fence about with Three Houses is the monastery itself. Now, the game lets you run around the monastery and do a bunch of non-combat stuff, like there's a fishing minigame, there's the greenhouse, there's a fighting tournament, which I guess interacts with the gameplay mechanics, so that's fine. And there's a ton of side quests to do. There's a ton of extra battles to take place in. There's a bunch of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the main story, and the game kind of really wants you to spend a lot of time on it, which I'm on the fence about because, you know, I don't really think Fire Emblem needs all of this non-combat stuff. I don't think Fire Emblem needs a Tea Party minigame of all things, but if I had to pick between the Tea Party minigame and the face-rubbing minigame, you know which one I'm gonna pick. Like, I know you don't need to run around the monastery so much, you can do combat-related stuff, but the game really rewards you for partaking in monastery activities. So you gotta do it, right? You gotta get all of the lost and found items, you gotta give a bunch of gifts to raise your support levels, you've got to do all that gardening and fishing and all of that other stuff to get your professor level up so you have more time to train your students and get more weapon ranks, and you've got to get your renown up so you can get a bunch of other bonuses from that as well. So, yeah, it's optional, but it's kind of not optional, I guess. I would just rather be spending more time on the actual fights. And another thing that's missing from the previous Fire Emblem games that's related to this is that you generally don't recruit people on the battlefield anymore. In some cases you do, but you have to meet certain requirements for it, and it's really rare. But generally speaking, to recruit another character out of one of the other houses, you have to get Byleth's stats up to a certain amount and then talk to the character. And this can be really difficult because you only have so much time to get Byleth's stats up compared to the students who spend a lot more time training and have a lot more opportunities. But, you know, to be fair, I don't really see why you would want any of the students out of the other houses, because you could just train up your own. If you recruit somebody out of one of the other houses, then they're probably going to already have some customization that might not be to your liking. And, you know, it's better to just work with the students that you've customized yourself. And besides, you're only allowed to deploy up to 12 units at max in every battle anyways. So, like, having all of those students only really matters if you're playing an Iron Man or something, and, you know, Iron Manning 3 houses is probably not the best plan, because, you know, with only 9 to 10 students to start, losing one is going to be very, very painful. At least that's how it seems to me. Right, so to wrap up this video, I think I will talk about the difficulty last. People have said that Three Houses is very easy outside of the new maddening mode. I have no idea why you didn't just call it lunatic, but this is a complete lie, as usual. Because, you know, Three Houses is shaping up to be a repeat of the Kingdom Hearts situation, and if you don't know what I mean, in the Kingdom Hearts fandom, they basically think that the only challenging difficulty is the highest one, which is a complete lie, because I played on the second highest, and it was actually pretty comfortable. It was semi-challenging, but not stupidly easy, at least to a low-ranking player like me, I guess. So, I don't want the Fire Emblem community to end up like that and think that Three Houses is only hard on the highest difficulty, because I am playing on Hard Classic, and after the time skip, it is actually, you know, right in that comfort level of mine where it's challenging but not crazy, at least until chapters 21 and 22 of Blue Lions, because those are absolutely insane. I have no idea why they designed them that way. Those just have, like, I don't want to spoil it, but those have, like, everything that should not be in Fire Emblem. Like, definitely should not be in Fire Emblem. If you'd like me to go into detail, I will. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on Three Houses. It's definitely a good game, the best modern Fire Emblem so far, but we're just kind of, like, yeah, we're getting further and further away of what Fire Emblem is to me. And I think that's rather unfortunate. Like, that's all I really want to say about the matter. It's not a bad game because it's not like the old games, but it is unfortunate that they're kind of phasing out the kind of classic style that I had grown up with so long ago. Three Houses is still very excellent, and I recommend at least trying it out if you've got yourself a Switch. And that's basically everything I have to say. So I will get back to playing Three Houses and let you know what I think of the other routes, maybe.